Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper, Part 3, The Lost Land. Chapter 9, The City. Down through the bright haze the strange road brought them, arching like a rainbow. Will and Brand found that they made no move of their own. Once they had stepped onto its surface, the road took them through space, and through time with a motion they could not afterwards describe. Then, out of the brightness, they were down in the lost land, and the road was gone, and all else vanished from their minds as they looked up at the place where they were. They stood high up, on a golden roof, behind a low lattice of wrought gold. Behind them, at either side, stretched the roofs of a great city, gleaming spires and towers and turrets crowding the skyline. Some golden as the place where they stood, some dark as black flint. The city was very quiet. This seemed to be early morning, cool and silent. Before them, as far as they could see, a luminous white mist lapped round the broad-topped trees of a park. Dew glistened on the trees. Somewhere beyond the park, the sun was rising into a haze of cloud. Will gazed out at the trees. They were not packed close together in the random clusters of the wild, but well-spaced, each broad and proud and full. They rose out of the mist like glimmering green islands in a gray-white sea. He saw oak and beech and chestnut and elm. The shapes were as familiar as the buildings around him were strange. Brand said softly at his side, "Look!" He was pointing past Will's back. Turning, Will saw among the peaks and ridges of the roofs a great golden dome, topped with a gold arrow pointing westward to the blue horizon line of the sea. The sides of the dome caught the early sun. Glittering, he realized that they were banded up and down with panels of crystal running between strips of gold. Brand peered, cupping his hands around his smoky glasses. "Is it a church?" "It could be. Looks a bit like St. Paul's. Or one of those Arab mosques." They spoke in whispers, by instinct. The place was so quiet. Nothing anywhere broke the silence of the city, except once, for a few seconds, somewhere far off among the tops of the trees, a seagull's plaintive cry. Will looked down at his feet. The roof on which they stood seemed to enclose them, its lattice work of wrought gold stretching all round like a fence. He reached out. The top bar would not move. It was perhaps half his height. He thought of climbing over, but changed his mind at the sight of the sheer drop, 20 feet away, or 20 feet down to the next roof on the other side. Brand reached out and took hold of the lattice in front of him. Then suddenly he gasped. Beneath his touch, the whole crisscross panel moved, swung free, balanced on a lower bar, and then dropped down from his hands over the edge of the roof, lengthening in hinged sections as it fell, like a folded ladder opening. Clang, 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 clang! The metallic sound rang out over the roofs, crackling the silence, ending in a resonant crash as the final section of the ladder-like golden framework hit the roof below. All over the silent city the echoes rose like birds. Will and Brand stared about them, watching for movement, for the waking of someone, somewhere, that such a clattering would surely bring, but there was nothing. "Dozy place, isn't it?" said Brand, a small shake in his voice. Beneath the bravado, and Will, following close after, he swung himself over the edge and clambered down the ladder of gold. They stood now on a broad lower roof, slanting more gently downward, crossed with raised strips of some darker metal that served as ridges down which they could walk. At the bottom edge of this roof, expecting to find themselves over a perpendicular wall, they found instead a great sweeping stairway of gray stone, with the glitter of granite stretching down from the very rim of the roof, far down into the mist and the trees. Together they ran down the steps, keeping close, and as they ran, the mist below them faded into nothing, falling back so that the trees stood clear over a sweep of green grass. And they saw, at the bottom of the stone steps, waiting 2 horses, standing saddled and bridled, untethered, with the reins laid loose over their necks. They were beautiful, gleaming animals, lion-colored, their long manes and tails yellow-white against the golden hide. The bits between their teeth and their stirrups were of silver, and the reins were red-plated silk. Will went up to the first and laid a wondering hand on its neck, and the horse blew softly through its nose and ducked its head, as if inviting him to mount. Brand said, gazing bemused at the horses, "Can you ride, Will?" Not really, Will said, but I don't think that will matter. And he put one foot on the horse's stirrup, and without a sound or effort, he was up on its back, smiling down, gathering up the reins. The second horse pawed the ground and nudged gently at Bran's shoulder with its nose. Come on, Bran, Will said. They've been waiting for us. He sat there, self-possessed as a huntsman, a small, stocky figure in blue jeans and sweater on the tall golden horse, and Bran shook his head in wonder and reached for the saddle bow. He was up, mounted, before he had a chance to think about it. The horse tossed its head, and Bran caught the reins as they fell toward him. All right, said Will gently to his horse, stroking its white mane. Take us where we should go, please. And the two horses moved off together, unhurried, confident, walking the stone-paved street at the base of the long sweep of rising stone steps. The trees of the broad green park towered over them at one side, shading the road, lush and dew-flecked and cool. Sunlight lay on the grass between them in bright pools, but there was no sound, no birds sang. Only the clop-clop of the horses' hooves rang through the quiet city, changing to a hollower, deeper sound as the two golden horses turned abruptly away from the park and into a narrow side street. Great gray walls loomed up on either side, huge black expanses of gray stone without a window anywhere. The street grew narrower, darker. Without altering their steady pace, the horses went on between the towering walls, while Will and Bran sat loosely, holding the reins and glancing nervously about. They turned a corner. Still, the high blank walls enclosed them in a narrow alley, with a sky no more than a thin blue strip overhead. But this time they could see a small wooden door set into the wall at their right, and when they drew level with this door, both animals stopped and began tossing their heads and pawing the ground. Will's horse shook its head from side to side so that the silver harness musically rang, and the long mane rippled and flowed like white gold silk. All right, said Will. He dismounted. So did Bran. As soon as their riders were on the ground, the two horses turned without hurry, in a brief confusion of clopping hooves and jangling harness, and together they trotted up the alley, back the way they had come. Their bright loose tails swung like torches in the shadowy street. Beautiful, said Bran, watching the golden shapes disappear. Will was standing before the door, studying its plain wooden surface. It was dark and pitted as if by age. Absently he thrust his thumbs into the leather belt, and one of them met the curve of the small brass horn that he had blown on the mountain in another life and another world. Unhooking the horn from his belt, he held it toward Bran. We've got to stay close together, whatever happens. You keep hold of one side of this, and I'll take the other. That'll help. Bran nodded his white head and slipped the fingers of his left hand through the single loop of the horn. Will looked against the door. It had no handle, no bell, no lock or keyhole, no means at all of opening it that he could see. He raised one hand and knocked firmly. The door swung outward. There was no one on the other side. Peering, they could see nothing within but darkness, each gripping one side with a little hunting horn. As if it were a life belt, they went in, and behind them the door swung shut. A glimmer of light from somewhere, untraceable, showed them they were in a narrow corridor, low-roofed, ending a few yards ahead, where a ladder rose upward out of sight. Will said slowly, I suppose we go up there. Is it safe? Bran's voice was husky with uncertainty. Well, it's all we can do, isn't it? And somehow nothing seems to be telling me not to, you know? It's true. It doesn't feel bad. Mind you, it doesn't feel too good either. Will laughed softly. That's going to be the same everywhere here. The dark has no power in this land, I think, but nor does the light. Then who has? I suppose we shall find that out. Will took a firm grip on the horn. Keep back, even if it'll be awkward climbing up there. They went up the broad runged ladder, one close after the other, still linked by their talisman, and emerged in an area so totally unexpected that for a few moments they both stood there motionless, looking. They had come up through an open trapdoor, close to one end of a long gallery. The floor stretched before them in curious sections, one after the other, on differing levels, so that one might be higher than the other, and the next lower than either. The place seemed to be a kind of library. Heavy square tables and chairs filled it, separated by low stacks of bookshelves, and the walls on their left were covered entirely with books. The ceiling was wood-paneled. The right-hand wall was not there. Will stared but could not understand. At his right, in this long room, a kind of carved wooden balustrade ran all the length of the floor, but no wall was beyond it, nor anything else visible, only blackness, blank dark. There was no sense of emptiness or a perilous void. There was simply nothing. Then he saw movement in the room. The first people they had seen in this land were appearing. Through a door at the far end of the long gallery, drifting singly men and women of all ages, dressed in a variety of simple clothes that seemed to belong to no particular age. There were not many of them. One by one, each figure silently settled, collecting a pile of books from the shelves, sitting down with them at a table, or standing browsing over a single book. Not one of them paid the smallest attention to Will or Bran. One man came up close beside them and stood frowning at the shelves lining the walls at their backs. Will said to him, greatly daring, "Can you find it?" But the man made no sign of noticing. His face lightened suddenly. He reached out and took a book and went back with it to sit down at a table nearby. Will peered at the title of the book as he went past, but it was written on the cover in a language he could not understand, and when the man opened the book, its pages were quite blank. Bran said slowly, "They can't see us." "No, nor hear us. Come on." They walked carefully together up the long gallery, skirting intent-seated figures, cautious not to trip or nudge. Nobody gave any flicker of notice as they passed, and whenever they looked down at a book that a man or woman was reading, they found that its pages seemed to bear no writing at all. There was no real door at the far end of the gallery, but instead an opening in the paneled wall from which a strange corridor led. This, too, was entirely paneled in wood. It was more like a square tunnel than a corridor, slanting down at a steep angle, turning corners in a zigzag pattern to and fro. Bran followed Will without question. He said only once, with sudden helpless force, "This place doesn't mean anything." "It will when we arrive," Will said. "Arrive at what?" "Well, at the meaning, at the crystal sword." "Look, what's that?" Bran had stopped, head up, wary. Ahead of them, as they turned a corner, the last section of the zigzag slope was white and glaring, filled with strong light blazing in from whatever lay beyond. For an instant, Will had a dreadful sense that they were descending into some great pit of fire. But this was a cold light, fierce without brilliance. He turned the last corner, stepping into the full light, and a strong, resonant voice ahead of him out of the brightness. "Welcome!" A great empty expanse of floor stretched before them, its walls lost in shadow, its roof too high to be seen. In the middle of the space stood a single figure, dressed all in black. He was a smallish man, not much taller than themselves, with a strong featured face, creased by humor at the eyes and mouth, though with no sign of a smile now. The hair of his head was gray, tight curled as a mat. He had a neat, crisp, curling gray beard with a curious dark line down the center like a stripe. He spread both arms and turned a little as if offering them the space around him. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to the city." They stood together before him. Bran took a step forward, letting go the horn. He said, "Is there only the city in the Lost Land?" "No," the man said. "There is the city and the country and the castle, and you shall see all of them. But first you must tell us why you have come." His voice was warm and ringing, but there was still weariness in it, and still he did not smile. He was looking at Will. "Why have you come?" he said. He said again, "Tell us." And Will pause there.